Thank you, everyone, for joining our State of Paid Leave conversation today. I'm Carol Joyner with Family Values at Work, the network of 27 state coalitions, and I'm joined today by some of our leaders who have been on the front lines fighting for paid leave in their states. But before we go to introductions, you should all know that next week on February 5th, we'll be observing the 28th anniversary of FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act, the unpaid system of leave that we have had in our country for more than almost 3 decades. And in addition to that, there will be the introduction of our bill, the Family Act, that would provide paid leave once it's passed. And so we're going to talk about all of that today. Before I get to the introductions again, I want to thank you for joining us. We are Family Values at Work, and this is the State of Paid Leave. I'm going to turn this over right now to our team here and invite folks to do two things. Tell us your name, the state you're from, your organization, and why you've been fighting for paid leave for so long in the states and on a federal level. Marilyn, let's start with you.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Marilyn Watkins from Washington State and the Economic Opportunity Institute and the Washington Work and Family Coalition. I've been working on both paid family medical leave and paid sick days for over 20 years now. And throughout that time, as I've gone across Washington State and talked to so many people, I've heard both really heartbreaking stories of people who were denied the time they needed to care for themselves or their loved ones, and also really inspirational stories about people who have just had amazing experiences. And I myself, through that time, I had cancer. And my mother died, and I cared for her last few weeks of life. And, both of those times I had an employer who supported me, allowed me the time I needed. But you shouldn't have to win the boss lottery, right? Everyone in our country needs to have these benefits. And I'll pass it on to Aisha.
Thanks, Marilyn. Hi, everybody. My name is Aisha Wells. I work for an organization called Mothering Justice. We're a social justice nonprofit. We're based in Detroit, Michigan, where it's cold now. We advocate for mamas of color through policy change. So Black mamas, Indigenous mamas, and mothers of color. Paid family leave has really affected me and made me so passionate about it because I am a mom who has a son who has special needs. He's 14, but I personally have had to juggle working my schedule around taking off from work and caring for my son. So this has been an extreme passion of mine, and I'm just grateful to be able to fight for not just myself as a mother, but other mothers who have had children with special needs. And that's just been a passion for many, many years. So I appreciate being able to do this work and fight on behalf of everyone. And I will pass it to Cherita.
Hi, everyone. Oh, I think I'm on mute. Hi, everyone. I'm Cherita Ellens. I'm with Women Employed, and we are based in Chicago, Illinois, where it's also very cold. Thank you for having us on here today. And, just like Marilyn and Aisha spoke about, the reason why we believe it's so critical to fight for paid leave is because it's just good policy to protect working individuals and their families against some of those economic hardships that we just, heard about, that there comes a point in time where most people will need to take time off from work to care for themselves or a family member who's suffering from a serious illness, or because they have a newborn, or they adopted or fostered a child, or they have a pregnancy or related conditions. They're caring for, other older family members, or quite frankly, because they have to cope with domestic and sexual violence. And, many workers don't have access to family and medical leave, paid family and medical leave in this country like we have in other countries. And, and so they're not in the financial position to be able to take that leave without it being paid and without having the job protections and other things that should come along with, with paid leave. So it's just, good policy to be able to pass and to be able to shore up economic security for women, but for all working people. And Alicia, I'm gonna pass it over to you.
Thank you, Cherise. Hi, everyone. I'm Alicia Contreras. I'm the Executive Director of Corazón Arizona. We are the Arizona Federation of Faith in Action. And so I've worked on paid leave and I continue to work on it. It's something that's deeply rooted in me for us, largely because it's impacted me personally. And then also how I see it impacts the communities, largely Latinx, Brown, Black, and Indigenous communities. So when we think about it over the years, I also have been able to win the employer or the boss, the supervisor lottery, and just being able to sit. My mom has had multiple medical scenarios that have happened over the years and really needed me to be present with my father and her. And if it wasn't for those good bosses, they were able to be flexible with me or just do whatever they could to know that I need to be there for her to have time to heal. I don't know where we would have been as a family, and no family should have to be making those decisions, and it's so important that we're able to be a part of the healing process. And even through COVID now, it's like a whole nother scenario, right? And so that has really been a part of the work and the why I fight for that. Also, when we think about paid leave, I am in a space where I have aging parents and I also want to eventually start a family. And so understanding that I am left out in many of the policies that are currently in play and where we need to go. And so I just want to make sure that families understand that we are an ecosystem, that policymakers understand we're an ecosystem or community, and afforded to be able to take care of ourselves. And when we think through the faith traditions, human dignity, workers' rights, and caring for our common good is largely through multiple faith traditions, from Catholicism to Judaism. As we think about our Muslim faith traditions and Indigenous faith traditions, it's super important that we think about this is how we care for ourselves as a community, and paid leave is just where we need to be as a community, as a larger network in Arizona, and as the federal level.
Thank you so much for all of that. Just so going forward, we're all clear about where we stand today in this country. As we observe the 28th anniversary of our unpaid leave system, we're doing that at a time when we know that COVID has laid bare all the ways in which our nation was unprepared to protect and support us during this pandemic. Because paid leave is critical to eradicating COVID, this is arguably the most important time for the nation to examine and to pass a fundamental, comprehensive paid leave program. Just to level set, the US remains one of very few countries that have no standard for paid leave. In the United States, only 21% of US workers have access to paid leave through their employers. And only 40% have personal medical leave. That's the time that you take off to recover from illness and deal with a medical condition that you might have. So only 40% have that through their employer. And it's usually through a TDI system, right? Personal medical leave means that that 40% can only take time off for themselves. Not any of the people Alicia just talked about, family members, loved ones. It's only for yourself. So, and the reality of it is that 93% of low-wage earners have no paid leave of any sort. And so this is how we started a year ago, before we knew about COVID. This was the reality of the United States pre-COVID. Let's think about how COVID has affected us and the realities of paid leave during a pandemic. How has COVID changed your thinking about paid leave? How has it affected your communities? What does it mean for the work that you do to pass comprehensive paid leave? I think we'll start with Aisha this time.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very loaded question. So first, COVID has changed my thinking because we now see that it's a basic right. And, you know, it's not just if you win the work lottery, or if, you know, you get the opportunity to work at some amazing place, or if you get to work from home, right? We've learned that it is the only way to make people successful economically, to bring equity to the workplace, to your community. And so it's really opened our eyes, I believe, not for us who've always been doing this work, but for people who just haven't had it. I had so many mothers reach out to me in different motherhood groups that I'm in on Facebook, like, what am I supposed to do? I don't have any time for my children. And it was really just an eye opener for so many mothers, understanding that this policy really doesn't even exist. And so it allowed us to take a step back and see that we're missing a big part of society. We're missing something that we truly are making us be at a disadvantage. So yeah, and so the way that it's changed us at Mother and Justice is so now that we have to communicate through Facebook, through, you know, videos, through all of those different avenues, and we're not just face to face anymore. We can give a hug and give a kiss and, hey, I missed you, I ain't seen you, girl, where you been? And now we see that we have to do that digitally now. Now we have to, you know, sit on the phone and do Zoom calls. And so that's what the biggest thing about COVID has showed us. So I will pass it on to Cherita.
Yeah, so I think when we talk about COVID and what COVID has done or how it's changed the work that we do, you know, we often I often find myself saying COVID hasn't changed much in terms of what I know to be true, right? What COVID has done was, you know, shine a big giant floodlight on the inequities and disparities that we knew were already there. And what it has done is allowed us to have a broader conversation with an audience that's now ready to listen. Because now that they are able to see firsthand how these disparities and inequities are impacting families, you know, their families or extended families or their communities or their neighbors. And so, you know, you talked about even the small percentage of people that do have access currently to some form of paid leave in this country, but we know that that's really segmented for higher income workers, right? And that lower income workers and women and, you know, people of color do not have access. They have higher rates of unmet needs when it comes to leave. And so when you get hit with a pandemic like COVID that has forced all of us to be at home, that has forced women who were already in caregiving, predominantly caregiving roles, to step up to be even more into caregiving roles. So there's data out there that says 2 out of every 3 caregivers in the United States are women. And, you know, right, and then we know that at least within Illinois, that the key in Black families or Black mothers are 84% of the time primary or sole breadwinners. We know that Latinx women, 49%, or mothers, 49% of the time are primary or sole breadwinners. So when you have these women in this primary economic position for their families, for providing for their families, are now in positions where they don't have access to be able to take leave for anyone who may fall ill, or to stay at home to care for their children because schools are closed, or to have access to insurance because their hours have been reduced, or that they've been furloughed from work. You know, when we start into the conversation a little bit later about what comprehensive paid leave looks like, that works for everyone and not just a select portion of our population, those are some of the things that we have to talk about. We know that, in this time that 72% of mothers during this period of COVID have had to work fewer hours because of childcare issues.
That's right. And all of this is happening, Cherita, at a time where during COVID, we know that the federal government tried to step up and make some change happen. And when they passed the Family First Corona Response Act way back in March, which included paid sick days, and paid family leave only for school closures, not for caring for yourself or your family member, but for school closures. When that law passed, it excluded up to 106 million people.
Yep.
And so all of the crisis that you're talking about was possibly helped with that law, but many, many people were left out.
Yep.
Let's go to you, Alicia, to talk a little bit about what you're seeing in Arizona.
Yeah, and I'm just getting, this isn't something that's new to any of us, right? We're deeply impacted, and we see, I'm getting a little emotional, is just in Arizona, that's the same thing that we're happening. And also, I will share is that I personally contracted COVID because I care for my parents, and have been doing all I can do to be socially distanced and not visiting people, not seeing other members of family. And his employer, didn't provide that, wasn't able to provide it. My dad got COVID positive and then brought it to my mom and myself. And that's really heavy. And it's not, for him not trying to protect himself or us, but not having the ability to have that paid leave, or also the culture that allows it, that as a Latinx man who needs time to take that time, that's a huge piece. And that's what we're seeing in a lot of our families. And I can tell you, this has been over 5 weeks, 6 weeks of active symptoms and being exhausted and fully not able to work. And I just think of all the other families in our lives that, weren't as blessed. Like, we are all healing, thank God, and on the mend. But so many families lost their loved ones, their parents, their brothers, their cousins, and, even faith leaders were lost. And it's because of this inability for, policymakers over the years to see the humanity in us, and knowing that workers have rights and workers need time to care for ourselves. And it's just, now more than ever, it's opening eyes for those that hopefully they'll find the courage that they can be bold to understand this is a right that we need. This is a value, and it's impacting all levels of communities. But we also know that it is impacting us as Latinx, Chicanx, Black and brown, other Indigenous families at a higher rates, because we are on the front lines. My dad doesn't have the option to be on a Zoom call and being as blessed to have that. He needs to be out there. And there's so many more families in Arizona just like that. And we continue to hear over and over within our faith traditions that we've been able to help with mutual aid throughout this last year, but they are coming back to us time and time again, letting us know that a loved one has passed away and they are grieving. So that's a whole nother piece. Not even just the health, like the trauma of like, oh, you lost someone, now get back to work. That has been so intense for us here in Arizona and all over many places in the country. And I will say we made it 10 months and we were safe. But in December, that was where we were. I'm just barely fully healing from COVID. And I understand that we are one of the lucky ones. We didn't end up in the hospital, right? We didn't end up in the hospital. But being in quarantine spaces, in different rooms, hearing your family cough horribly and just begging that they can please spend time on your stomach so your lungs will be healthy and you won't get pneumonia. This is the most terrifying time in my life that I have had to experience. And I have so many more friends and family members that have their family currently isolated alone in hospitals. And we as a country, we as a people need to do better for all of us.
Yes.
Absolutely. And my heart goes out to you. We were all holding our breaths, knowing what you were going through, and sending our love and our prayers your way for you, your family. And it's just been very, very difficult for so many people. But there are states that have have more infrastructure for paid leave. And there's evidence to show that in those states, we were able to flatten the curve or have a measure of control around the movement of COVID. And so I want to go to you, Marilyn, to talk about your experience in Washington State, the fact that Washington State has a comprehensive paid leave program that kicked in just in time, right before COVID hit.
Yeah, so, and yes, Alicia, I mean, just blessings on you and your family and everyone else out there who's been directly impacted by COVID. Washington is one of the states that we have both comprehensive paid sick leave, so that everyone in Washington State does have access to sick leave, though as we've learned from COVID, a couple weeks is not enough when you're in a worldwide pandemic, especially for all those frontline workers. But we also have a comprehensive paid family and medical leave insurance system, and I want to emphasize it's an insurance system. So it follows the workers around. It's not dependent on your relationship with a particular employer. And that is just a really critical thing. It has been, it's been a wonderful thing for us here in Washington, one of the bright lights of 2020. The program started last January to provide benefits after having spent a couple of years building up to that and building up the trust fund for it. But, people continued to have babies. People still got cancer. People's parents still had strokes and heart attacks and whatnot. People still got in car accidents. People had more often mental health issues that needed to be addressed in all sorts of ways. So having that comprehensive program where people could take extended times off, 12 and in some cases up to 18 weeks off with pay in order to nurture a new child, to heal themselves, to care for a loved one, that has just been tremendously valuable for us. And Washington has been, and I think it's partly because we had sick leave and we had paid family and medical leave. It's been one of the states that has, we've way too many deaths, way too many cases of COVID, but we have been one of the more successful and somewhat flattening the curve. Wish we could have done a lot more than that. We've, I could go on and on about these things, but we've also learned some of the gaps that are there as well in our existing programs and places we need to move forward and make it better and more accessible to everybody. But I think it's also important to note that, not everyone has that traditional employee-employer relationship. There's so many people who are the gig workers and the contract workers, all those people bring in stuff to our doors if we're lucky enough to work from home and whatnot, people who are doing home care. All of these people also need to have access to these critical benefits to keep themselves healthy and to care for their loved ones. And so we need to be sure we're designing all of these programs, particularly paid family medical leave insurance, in ways that people who are not in that sort of really traditional employment situation, who are small business owners themselves, can really also fully participate and have the protections.
Thank you. Aisha, do you want to say some about the work in Michigan in this particular moment and y'all's response to COVID?
Yeah, so in Michigan, we also have a sick policy, just as Washington State does. And so that was helpful in the beginning for a lot of families to be able to take those few days off when they were sick. But at Mother and Justice, what we realized too is that you have to be able to not only, like Alicia was saying, not only be able to fight for policy, but provide some resources as well, especially during COVID. So one of the biggest things that we did at Mother and Justice is that we helped pass out diapers and formula, along with realizing that these folks, aren't going to be able to take off. They're already trying to make ends meet because they've missed so much time at work. And so we've also decided to provide another resource, and a resource that's probably one of the most expensive things for moms, especially with newborn babies. We know that diapers and formula is very, very expensive. And so that's one way that we've decided to help our moms. Another way that we've decided to help our mamas and our caregivers in Michigan is letting them lift up their voices, like I mentioned before, digitally. We have let them be their authentic selves, right? We've given them the opportunity to take their phones. We're all on our phones. We're all using, our computers, our phones all day long now, probably more than ever, right? And we're using that to let them tell their authentic, true stories of what they have been going through throughout COVID, and we're not handing them a script and saying, hey, can you read this? Can you say these things? We're allowing them to say, hey, I'm at home with these babies, right? I'm trying to figure out this caregiving situation. I'm working maybe a day or two, or I'm laid off, or I'm furloughed. And so we've empowered our moms and given them the opportunity to share their voices just from their phone, right? And then at Mother Justice, we use our platform to give that to the rest of the lawmakers, to our community, to everyone, to show that this is a big issue and we have to change this paid leave policy. We have to allow mamas to be able, and caregivers to be able to take that time. And so showing that these folks are really in real time dealing with these issues is something that we have to continue to do. So that's one of the many things that we're doing at Mother Justice, to lift up the voices of our mamas.
Thank you. Before I go to you, Cherita, I just want to remind who've just joined us that this is the state of paid leave. Family Values at Work leaders talking about the importance of paid leave in this moment and what our government needs to do to ensure that everyone has access to paid family and medical leave. I'm joined here today with Marilyn Watkins from the state of Washington, Aisha Wells from Michigan, Alicia Contreras from Arizona, and Cherita Ellens from Illinois. And with that, Cherita, tell us how y'all have been dealing with COVID and what this means for the moment.
So I think like many cities and states, we see that there are needs that are not being met by the relief packages. And, and as well-meaning as those relief packages have been and how helpful they have been for those that they've been helpful for, the carve-outs left out, Carol, you talked about this earlier, the carve-out left out so many people, the whole gig industry, health workers, people with employers over a certain amount, people employers under a certain amount. And so there, you know what I'm saying? So the needs are real. And I think that what we have seen in COVID is people realizing the interconnection of all of us and pulling together. So, we've set up through the city and through the state, we've set up emergency funds for small business owners to tap into. We've set up emergency funds for families. They've instituted policies that would put an immediate ban on evictions. They, set up policies that would put an immediate stop to shut off of utility services to make sure that, people are not without electricity and heat, during these times. And so they're real practices that are going into place to make sure that we're taking care of one another, while at the same time trying to figure out how do we continue to plug these gaps and raise our voice louder so that people can understand when you have these carve-outs, what does it mean? So when you pass minimum wage and you have an opportunity to get rid of sub-minimum wage, but you decide to negotiate that away, so what happens? Well, now COVID hits, and all those workers in the restaurant industry that were making sub-minimum wage didn't qualify for the unemployment benefits that came through. So now what do they get? So they weren't making minimum wage. They don't have access to benefits. They don't have access to paid leave. And now they don't even have access to the UI benefits that will help them over this hump. So like when we're creating these policies, we really have to understand who are we trying to benefit at the end of the day. And it is not okay to just pass something, because you really have to understand who are you hurting in the end when you do that. And I think COVID, again, is one of those opportunities that's showing how inequitable a lot of our policies are and how much harder we have to work to fight to make sure that we have that equity land when we are creating these policies.
Thank you for that. Alicia, I would love for you to go to that very point. In the state of Arizona, there is a paid sick days bill that y'all passed many years ago, but there's no paid family and medical leave. And you talked about all the ways in which workers and family members were excluded from the protections that have passed since COVID. Talk a little bit more concretely about what that means for people on the ground, who has been left out, and what are some of the protections that we need to have so that everyone gets covered.
Yeah, so I think many of the folks here that are sharing is that we have been working and doing the same things: mutual aid, seeing, listening, hearing where folks are. And as we came off this historic year of 2020, and what does it look like for our engagement, our voter registration work that was happening, getting folks out, sharing what was motivating them to get to the polls, turning out in record numbers. And so that has been a huge piece, is starting understanding that our elected officials need to be working and governing with the communities so they can see where they are creating or not creating a sense of belonging as we are working with faith folks, right? And so that's where we've been able to really get our communities listening, when debates were happening, what does it look like for us to go back? Now we're in a ledge session, having those same folks that turned out last year to share those stories with their legislators, and how we're thinking about lobby days and virtual, whatever way we can have these continue these conversations, and saying that this is where our keys are. So with us in Arizona, understanding that making sure that the bills that are coming in are going to be bills that we can build on, because we know that we don't have the power yet to move the policies that we need, but those bills are going to move on to 2021, 2022, and moving forward as we think through our upcoming governor's races, and in the next 4 years, what does it look like on a larger level for our state and where we can really move policies. So one of the things that we have been having to do is also, after this huge turnout of folks showing up, sharing their stories, that they want elected officials that are going to really move towards building policies and governing with us so we can have paid leave and move through there. Now we're coming in the space of having to fight voter suppression bills. That has been the huge piece that we've seen on the wake of last year in the midst of a pandemic. We have currently bills that are attacking our permanent early voting list. So folks have been for years mail in Arizona, and that proved to be successful and safe bipartisanly, right? Especially during the folks were able to drop off their ballot and try to feel safe during a pandemic. Now that's under attack, whether or not we can have that, and making sure that we're not purging people. There's bills that are coming in that are talking about wanting, if you're going to vote by mail, to notarize your ballot. And then conversations of removing the word of permanent from these early voting lists. And while these are ways where we know that we have turned out our communities year and year after again, they've registered and they understand that working class families do not have the time to wait in lines for hours. And we understand that these are obstacles that have been put in front of our communities time and time again, whether it's closing of polling locations, not enough equipment, long hours. Being able to vote by mail has been tremendous for all communities, whatever side of the spectrum that you are, so you can cast your vote and that you have that right. And so that is what we're currently doing now in the legislature, is fighting those bills that we're going to hurt all Arizonans, right? And so that's going to be huge work for us to do this year. So making sure that folks can actively participate in our democracy so that they can fight for the bills that will show that they belong and keep them safe, especially in this time of COVID and beyond.
That is so inspiring, Alicia. Washington has had vote by mail for years, and I have to say I love being able to vote in the inconvenience of my own home with my voter's pamphlet in front of me and whenever. Anyway, but I think, one of the things, we've seen so many things happening, of course, in this last year, and one of them is people really coming together, people really understanding the value of the people working together for the common good, people understanding we need our government to actually act and respond and be the our collective voice and our collective actor in times like this. So that's been really inspiring. But I think we've also seen that those people who have been profiting and doing very well and like the status quo are also using the pandemic and the financial crisis that we now find ourselves in as excuses for not making change and as an organizing tactic for their side to block progressive change and to block the kinds of investments that we need our government to make in all of our communities in childcare, absolutely in childcare and in health and in public health and in all of those, in housing and in all of the things that are going to keep our communities whole and safe. So we've really been spending a lot of time at EOI, in addition to all the stuff around paid leave. We've also been working a lot with childcare providers and childcare teachers and families to really put pressure on our state government to invest a whole lot more public money in childcare. And of course, we need our federal government to also step up and put a lot of federal money in childcare, because we're not going to get our economy going back, and we're not going to get people back at work, and we're not going to have the full value of everyone's contributions unless parents can go back to work, unless they know their children are safe and well tended and are going to be thriving. So we've been really working on that. We've also been, we have a bill in our legislature right now that would actually improve our paid family and medical leave program. We passed it through a political process. There are compromises that one has to make. And so, but we have heard over and over from people in our communities, and especially from Black workers, immigrant workers, other workers of color, low-wage workers of all races and ethnicities, that if they don't know they're going to have their job to go back to, if their employer isn't required to continue their health insurance after they got cancer, while they're caring for their kid in the hospital, when they just had a baby, then they can't take the leave. They can't take that risk. And more than ever now in this economy that we're in now, people are even more afraid than ever to take the leave without those kinds of absolute guarantees. We also know that the qualifying threshold, that you have to have worked so much in order to be able to access the leave, that, you know, those barriers are just too high anyway for a lot of part-time workers who are forced to work part-time, whose employers can play around with how many hours they're going to get, what their shifts are going to be. We really need to make sure when we're designing programs that we're setting, you know, whatever the qualification is, in a way that it really is going to be something that's inclusive, and that lower wage workers, shift workers, people who are forced to work seasonally or whatnot are still able to access that leave, because they absolutely need the income when they need to go on leave. And so we're working as hard as we can to both improve things here in Washington State, but also carry the message to Washington, D.C., the other Washington, as we like to call it, to be sure that we get what we need here in Washington State, but also all of our friends and loved ones around the country in every state also have access.
So just say a little bit more about one thing, and what were some of the other equity issues that you did pass when you passed the Washington paid leave bill? Because I believe that you had a decent family definition, that's critical, and a much better wage replacement than what the Family Act is offering and some other states were able to get.
Yeah, so Washington was the 5th state to pass comprehensive paid family and medical leave, and we were the first state in the country to build a program from the ground up, where we weren't tacking family leave onto an existing disability insurance system that had been in place for a long time. So we really were a pioneer, but we were able to also learn a lot from the other state programs around some of the critical things that really made these programs more equitable. And one thing we knew we had to do was increase the benefit level above what it was in some of the other states, and make it progressive so that lower wage workers were getting a higher percentage of wage replacement. We're getting close to their full wages. So actually both low and middle income workers here in Washington State actually get more than they do in any other state actually that has a actually operating program at this moment, and much higher than what the Family Act that's been introduced in Congress provides, that was written several years ago before we started making some of these innovations. The states that followed Washington, so there's now 10 states that have programs that have been enacted. A lot of those have built on us and gone further than what Washington is able to do. We have a pretty expansive family definition. It includes siblings and grandparents and grandchildren and in-laws, as well as, you know, the more traditional nuclear family that's also often been included in these kinds of policies. But we're also trying to add an additional category because people's families look all sorts of different ways. People love who they love. They have care relationships with people who don't necessarily fall into specific categories or fit a specific list. So we're trying to expand that family definition. We're trying to lower the qualifying threshold, both ongoing, but it's particularly important now because so many people couldn't work this last year. And just when they're starting to go back to work, that might be when the accident happens, the baby arrives, whatever. They're going to need that leave when that happens. And then we're trying to extend job protection and the guarantee that your health insurance, if your employer provides it, would be continued for basically all workers in our state. Right now, it's a pretty small percentage, and we know it tends to be those more privileged workers. And if your employer isn't required to do it, then, you know, that's not an issue for sort of professional white workers who are comfortably working from home, but it is a serious issue for workers of color and lower wage workers. And so, yeah, so we're doing what we can to try to change that and really try to carry those messages of these are the really critical things that we hear over and over from our communities about what are really important to make these programs as equitable as we can possibly make them. And I think the other thing is that we need to build in evaluation metrics and community engagement and outreach into the process, be sure that's embedded in the policies, so that we are continually improving. We're getting the information we need that we can continually improve and continually go forward and be sure that we're actually having as much impact for healthy families, healthy babies, economically stable families, and healthy businesses and healthy communities as we can.
Mm-hmm. You know, Cherita, you brought us into this discussion, I believe, in your last, remarks about equity, right? Mm-hmm. And talk a little bit about what you're seeing on the ground in Illinois with regard to equity and what particular groups of people will be left out if we do not pass a comprehensive paid leave program in the United States.
Well, I think we hit on a few of those.
Mm-hmm.
Most certainly, I think the gig economy will not benefit from this, but most of our lower wage workers, our hourly workers that punch a clock every time they go to work, if we don't include the job protections so that they have the job when they go back, if we don't have the progressive pay replacement or wage replacement to make sure that it's feasible for them to take the leave. Because if you pass it and you say, okay, it's a flat, everybody gets, I'm throwing a number, 60%, right, of replacement. If you make $100,000, that's $60,000. If you're making a minimum wage of 15, and let's face it, most places don't have 15 yet, you're talking about $9 an hour. So you're at poverty wages. And so you can't sustain your family on that. If you don't include an inclusive family definition, many of our families of color would be left out because many of us, we don't have the traditional nucleus family. Like we're taking care of nieces and nephews and cousins and aunties and things of that sort. And then also, if we don't have the expansive definition of family, you're going to leave out, many people in our LGBTQ communities as well. So, there are, and of course, working mothers and things of that sort. So there are huge groups of people that stand to lose if we don't have these equitable, if we don't apply these equitable lens. And I know, yes, it's a process. We have paid sick time in Chicago, but we don't have it in the state of Illinois. So, when we had to create our Know Your Rights cards for COVID, and it was it was all across the board because this is what you get through, the COVID relief packages that are available. If you live in Chicago, here are some additional benefits you have. And if you're an Illinois resident outside of Chicago, then this is what you have. And so, we understand that that's a progress, but I also understand that many times it's so difficult to go back, or the rollback takes a really long time. And then in the meantime, we're continuing to build on this system of systemic racism and sexism, right? And that already persists. And we know that it's there. And during these times, we've, through COVID and through the civil unrest, if we have learned nothing else in this country, is that we are deeply rooted in inequity. And at some point, while we're talking about equity as a country and building back better, we have to do things differently. And, and so some of those things, so when you talk about building your coalitions, our coalition in Illinois, our paid leave coalition, is extremely diverse. We have members from early childhood and childcare communities. We have, so that they can bring the lens of child development to the conversation. We have unions at the table, so they can, bring the voice of, of the worker. We have small businesses at the table and entrepreneurs, so they can, talk about, why they want a state administered paid family leave program, because, it helps them provide benefits for their employees that they cannot provide for themselves. So I think that, it's important to have all of these entities at the table when you're originally designing, the policy. And you aim high, and of course you're going to negotiate away. But if you have them at the table, it's a lot harder to look someone in the eye that's at the table with you and say, I'm getting ready to negotiate your benefit away, than it is if you're not at the table, then you have to go back and explain it.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
Mhm.
As we head toward the end of this conversation, I'd just like to let any people who are just signed on to viewing that we're having a conversation about the state of paid leave. We're Family Values at Work partners are coming together to talk about where we stand in this country with the lack of paid leave. I'm here today with Marilyn Watkins from the state of Washington, Aisha Wells from Michigan, Alicia Contreras from Arizona, and Cherita from Illinois. And as we move toward the end of this conversation, the question that I actually have to ask, and it's, what do we do next? Where do we go from here? What is it that we have to do to win comprehensive paid leave in this country? And so I'm going to throw out a few things for those watching and listening. The very first thing is that we need to contact our Congress members and tell them to make sure that the Biden-Harris American Rescue Plan that aims to provide comprehensive paid leave and direct payment and support for states and support for cities and many other policies and protections, that gets a hearing, that becomes a bill and it gets passed through the House and the Senate. It is our only chance of beginning to really, as we move toward getting a vaccine, and quite honestly, I don't know where I am on that list. I feel like I'm not going to get a vaccine until probably the summer at this rate.
Oh no, don't say that, Carol.
I hope it's going to be sooner than that. But so as we all march toward vaccines, some sooner than others, we need to know that there's going to be policies in place, both COVID emergency policies that include comprehensive paid leave and protections that help to bring us back online economically. And so, so we have got to get moving on this Biden-Harris American Rescue Plan. The other thing is the Family Act is going to be reintroduced next week by the esteemed Congresswoman from Connecticut, Rosa DeLauro. And we need to make sure that our Congress members know that they need to co-sponsor the Family Act. It is our best chance for laying a ground. But while you're talking to your Congress members, make sure to mention all of the equity issues that we just talked about. We talked about job protection and how people are not going to take paid leave if they're not going to have a job to come to when they're done, right? We talked about wage replacement. We talked about inclusive family definition. And, you know, Marilyn, you didn't mention this, but I am going to, because you're one of the only states on here that have a paid leave program in your state. We need to make sure that the state programs are allowed to continue innovating and providing a higher standard of for their citizens. We know the Family Act will be a floor. States need to be able to maintain their programs so that they can provide more where they're able to. And so what I'm going to ask everyone to do is text one word, and here's the word, paid leave, to 844-952-2880. So you're going to text paid leave all together, PAIDLEAVE, paid leave, to 855-944, I'm sorry, 844, I can't even read, 844-955-2880. And that'll get you started. You'll be patched in to your member of Congress, and you can begin explaining to them why paid leave is a critical policy right now for the pandemic, but also for the future, because we always will need to be able to care for ourselves and our family members. Having said all of that, I'm going to ask you all to go another round and just tell me, what is it you're doing to ensure and push for and fight for comprehensive paid leave in the United States? What should we be doing right now, in addition to what I said?
So I could go. The biggest thing that I believe we should all take advantage of is using our social media networks. I know all of us are not fans of social media, right? And some we prefer over others. But I think the biggest thing is for us to use the platforms that we have, especially because most of us are quarantined. A lot of us are mostly at home. And so we definitely want to use those platforms to talk about paid family leave. So at Mother and Justice, we use Twitter, we use Facebook, we use LinkedIn, we use all the things, right? Any way that we get in touch with you. You know, you're on LinkedIn, you get attached, you can talk to the business world, right? And so we want to ensure that we are using those platforms to speak out and talk about your paid leave experiences and how it's adversely affected you. And so that is the biggest way that you can use your voice at home. Another thing that I always encourage mamas to do is to join your local coalitions and community efforts that are going on, like Mother and Justice is doing. You know, be a leader in your community, even if you're at your children's school, you know, when they go back to school, or even if you become a state level senator or, you know, or House representative, or even at the federal level. But encourage you to find that leadership within and empowering yourself. So it's okay for you to do it. You can be the mom at home that becomes the voice in your community. That's absolutely wonderful. That's fine. And we embrace that, right? And so use your social media and use your voice no matter what pathway you are in life. And so that's how we're using it here. And now, Alicia, you would like to.
Yeah, I agree 100%. We're similar things, you know, utilizing our new tools and our old tools and just picking up the phone. We are checking in with people to see how they are doing. We know that there's so much levels of grief and trauma from last year and even from years ahead, from before, right? And so having those conversations with other families, what are they experiencing, and understanding that there's power in that community, power in those conversations. We're having family members and in virtual meetings. We have one coming up February 11th, where you can join us at Corazón Arizona, so you can learn how to connect with us in your region. And also, this technology has been helpful, but it also has created a divide for folks. So finding a space that you can do socially distance, creative ways to have those conversations with folks. We're working with different coalitions in the state that are going to continue to think through what does it mean to educate folks, and making sure that it's also normalized, right? So when we do get paid leave, because I'm putting it in the universe, we're going to get it, understanding that Black and brown folks also, that's not a thing. You know, I know my dad will be sick and he will still go to work when he has it, right? And there's so many things, and it's just, you know, understanding that this is a part, it's not a handout. It is a conversation that this is a right, and it's a need for us to create sustainable systems that families can live and thrive and not just be hanging on for dear life all the time, right? So having those conversations, sharing your stories, signing up for the lobby days that are happening in your state, making the time to have those calls. You know, it's going to take you 2 seconds, right, to make those calls and share your stories. It's so important. And also talking to the business and faith communities at the same time, listening to them to understand that this is also going to help you long term. We are going to come out from behind this computer screen eventually, right? And keeping a paid leave, ability to have a paid leave, and the amount of money that it costs to train a new employee, right? Being able to keep them in and keep that institutional knowledge into your business, your small business, or your older businesses, right? How can that be a part of it? And having faith communities of all traditions share up through their own spiritual lens and social teachings lens to understand this is something that's impacting all of our communities on levels, whether it's our students, our elderly folks, in just seeing how that we can come together. There's a lot of conversation right now about bridge building and reconciliation. Well, providing paid leave is going to be a huge part of that. And it's intentional that we need to do. And we're doing that. And we're going to share stories with you all in this network. And we have been looking at other states and seeing what's worked. And so that Arizona can have that eventually too, right? We need it and we're going to have it. It's going to happen.
Thank you so much. Marilyn, give us 1 minute of just what are our marching orders?
Well, one of the things we've learned is you can't just like rest on your past victories, right? You got to keep moving forward. And you can't just elect good people to office. If we manage to do that, we have to like not only have their backs, we have to like be pushing hard on their backs, right? Because we know our opponent. There are people who are super comfortable out there, even like right this very minute, who they don't want to give up one iota of their wealth and power, and they will fight every minute to keep what they have and use all sorts of fear tactics and tactics of division, as we've seen, to try to stop things that we know are actually good for all of us, that all of us benefit from having these kinds of healthy, thriving communities. So we are continually out in the, out via Zoom and other, social media and whatnot, out there in the community over this past year, telling people about paid family and medical leave, explaining how all of these different state and federal rights and policies interact with each other, getting people's experiences, getting those stories. And then, as I said, we have this bill to improve our program already in the state legislature after 1 year of operation. And also working with all of you, because we know we need to take this, that the best thing we can do for the national movement is have super success here in Washington state, but also then make sure that we're translating out everything we're learning to everybody else and to the federal effort, as well as continually listening to people in our states and to what people are learning from other states, so that we can be in a process where we're really moving forward all together.
Thank you so much. Cherita, I'm going to turn it over to you, but I just to send us on out of here. And I just have to say that I'm hoping that people will text to call their Congress members to support paid leave, both in the Biden-Harris American Rescue Plan and for the Family Act that's being reintroduced next week. And so we need you to text paid leave altogether, PAIDLEAVE, to 844-955-2880. I'm going to give it to you, Cherita, but to sign us out of here. But I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, from our entire network, thank you so much. A, for the work that you've always been doing around paid leave. B, for how you have thrown down during this COVID pandemic and supporting both your communities, your state, and the nation with your knowledge about paid leave. And then finally, thank you for joining us today in this conversation. Cherita, I'm going to let you close us out. We have about 1 minute left on this clock.
Okay, it's really simple. I'm a +1 of what everyone on this panel said, because what they said was absolutely correct. And at the end of the day, we just want you to give a damn. We want you to care about things, even if it impacts you or not. and understand that the people that need it the most, they're out here trying to survive. So you're not going to always hear their voice. So know that we are working to amplify their voices and we need you to give it down. That's it.